Hi, my name is Rachel Dickinson. I'm a research fellow on the Everyday Cyborgs project at Birmingham Law School at the University of Birmingham. Thanks for having me as a participant in today's in the workshop. I look forward to discussing everything with you on the 16th. The project I work on is called Everyday Cyborgs. It's a 5-year project funded by the Wellcome Trust that is investigating laws-bounded treatment of persons with attached and implanted medical devices, particularly smart medical devices that are becoming even more technologically advanced. But the potency of DIY APS, as an example, within this work has resulted us in identifying some additional research interests solely in that area. And we secured some funding from the ESRC, Economic and Social Research Council, to pursue that. We've also applied for further funding, which I'll talk to you about a bit more later on. Our interest is in law, taking as wide a definition of law as is possible. We look at everything from legislation and regulation down to the governance of professional practice and best practice in that area. So when it comes to law's relationship with technology and scientific advances, it's often believed that law is reactive and always catching up to regulate these advances. Some people may even see that law is putting limitations on these advances. You know, technology has breakthroughs and then the law comes along and says, hold on, you can't really be doing that, and reins it in, which can be disappointing in some cases. But it's also worthwhile to consider how law shapes which scientific and technological developments are actually pursued by society. And this is certainly relevant when we think about #WeAreNotWaiting and DIY APS, which emerged as a reaction to a lack of interest by the mainstream avenues of scientific research and development to invest and pursue these technologies. So as DIY APS operates outside of the traditional legal frameworks for medical device and software development, and the frameworks for patient use of medical devices and care, it poses a range of legal and ethical problems. DIY APS is a complex ecosystem, as you can see on the slide. There are a wide range of different actors involved. And identifying the parties in a legal relationship in terms of obligations or responsibilities to one another is not always easy. I'm not going to discuss the legal challenges and questions that DIY APS raises today, but I can signpost you to some other publications that will go through that. So the first one there on the list examines is the challenges that DIY APS brings for doctors and doing their role. The second one looks at the issue of liability for harms and who is responsible if something goes wrong for a person using DIY APS. The third one looks at different perspectives on these issues by various actors involved in that ecosystem that I just showed you. And then we have a forthcoming publication on the interpretation of regulation and how a healthcare professional's interpretation or misinterpretation can maybe raise ethical questions about the standard of care that a patient is receiving. And that speaks to why there needs to be work done in order to address the legal challenges to prevent these situations arising. My focus today, however, is on whether the advances in market-authorised artificial pancreas systems spells the end of DIY APS, and particularly whether this resolves the legal and policy uncertainties that DIY APS poses. To give a bit of a spoiler, my answer is no, that it doesn't. From a legal perspective, it might be tempting to assume that the coming to market of regulated and licensed devices from industry will resolve all the legal uncertainties, but I'm going to try and show you that I don't think that will be the case. The global artificial pancreas device systems market is currently experiencing a robust growth, and it's predicted to see a compound growth rate of 18% between now and 2025. In the US, the Food and Drug Administration approvals of innovative products have increased, and device manufacturers are viewing that as a positive sign for the global market. In the UK, the Cambridge APS FX app, developed by Roman Havorka at the University of Cambridge, was the first artificial pancreas app to be licensed for use in adults, children, and in pregnant women. Medtronic's MiniMed 780G was granted a CE mark, which allowed its placement on the EU market in 2020. That device boasts added features to an earlier version, the MiniMed 760G, that was launched in the UK in 2019. And it has features like correction boluses, customizable targets, reduced alarms, and a simplified user interface. This all seems promising. Not only are device manufacturers now making the technology the DIY community wanted to see them make, they are also investing in adding new features and creating new models. So from a legal perspective, this should be good news. These technologies have been through the market authorization process and subjected to the rigorous testing required to be issued with a CE mark, which should, in theory, resolve the legal uncertainty surrounding automated insulin tracking and delivery systems. The DIY community, for all intents and purposes, now don't have to wait. They can transfer to using these systems. So we should technically see a shift to users from DIY APS to using or being licensed or being prescribed these licensed devices. But I'm not sure it'll be that straightforward. So I'm going to explore with you some reasons why I think that is the case. First of all, access to industry options is not guaranteed. Second, DIY APS users are now experts, and it's clinicians across the healthcare system that need to catch up with that expertise. Third, the community aspect of DIY APS is an advantage that may encourage its continuance. And fourth, the regulatory frameworks may still stifle innovation, which may lead people to still favour DIY APS systems that operate outside those channels. So how medical devices are being regulated in Europe is changing. The 2002 Medical Devices Regulation has been replaced by the 2017 Medical Devices Regulation. The transition period for member states to implement this was due to end in May 2020, but was extended until May 2021 due to COVID. The 2017 regulation makes a number of changes, including measures to track the device and monitor its safety throughout its lifetime. Devices must have a unique device identifier so that it can be traced throughout the supply chain. That should facilitate swift recall if there's any safety issues identified with a device. Notified bodies in member states will be able to conduct more post-market surveillance to monitor the safety and efficacy of devices. In the UK, where I'm based, the situation is a little bit complicated because of Brexit. I mean, what hasn't been complicated because of Brexit? The EU exit transition period ends on the 1st of January 2021. So the UK, that's obviously before the May 2021 deadline for implementing the new MDR. So the MHRA, which is the UK notified body, has issued guidance that CE marks will no longer be valid from 2023, though they will be in Northern Ireland, just to add another complexity there. And a new UK CA mark will be available for new devices entering the UK market from the 1st of January 2021, and then that will become mandatory from the 1st of July 2023. So there's a lot of change and upending, and there might be choices to be made by manufacturers about which devices they make accessible to the UK market. Discussions at the moment are that, you know, we still have access to the same devices, but that may or may not be the case. We'll have to wait and see. Legislation is currently working its way through Parliament that will provide powers to create a new system for testing and marketing medical devices. And the government has indicated a keen interest in making the UK an attractive market for device manufacturers, and expedited approval processes have been mentioned as one way this might be achieved. So that might be promising in terms of the UK becoming a bit more of a hub, but we'll see. I think I would err on the side of caution in relation to government promises. But I think getting a device approved for market is only one hurdle when it comes to patients being prescribed the technology as part of their care. The NHS has quite a poor reputation on the uptake of medical innovations. It is a healthcare system that is continually under budget pressures, so financial considerations can often outweigh the benefit of technology for patients, particularly if that benefit is not simply clinical. So if the benefit is not just that it manages diabetes well, but it adds other lifestyle pluses, that's not necessarily case enough to get technology taken up. There are two levels to bureaucracy as well. First, the general listing of an item as available by use by the NHS that requires approval by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, called NICE. Once a device has been listed by NICE, then it can be procured by the NHS. But within that, largely individual NHS trusts operate their own procurement mechanisms, and clinical commissioning groups, the CCG part, will take decisions on which services to procure for a particular area. So once a device is approved for market, other factors might preclude it from becoming quickly and readily available for patients, depending on the trust area that they live in. This is often described as a postcode lottery. If you're in one area, you might be eligible, but your friend 2 miles down the road might be in a different area, so might not be. But even if the device comes to market, and even if it comes to your NHS trust, you might not meet the eligibility criteria used to prescribe it. And that can depend on a range of factors in terms of how well you already manage the disease. So it might be that the criteria might be that if you are good at managing your disease, using the traditional methods, then you wouldn't be eligible because, well, you're good, it's working already. You might not be needed, the technology might not be needed, or otherwise you might not get one because you're not managing your diabetes well enough, so therefore the technology might be seen as another burden in terms of that management. So NHS patients can of course purchase their own devices, but that might not be within everyone's financial means. The CAM APS FX app is available on a subscription model, and it costs around £70 per month. So these additional regulatory and bureaucratic hurdles indicate that some current DIY users may continue to use DIY because getting access to an approved device might be difficult. So it's not just as simple as the device is available on the market. There's so many other layers here that it needs to get through before the person can use it. So it might be too much or too long of a wait as well. And of course, the simultaneous progression of the DIY technologies in terms of new features. By the time you might be able to get CAM-FX on your in your trust area, your DIY system might already have those features, and you might be happy enough to continue using that. Another reason DIY technologies may continue is that clinicians will need time and training to become fully informed on the benefits of the technologies and how to ensure their patients get the best experience from using them. At the moment, there is a reluctance to engage with DIY tech in clinic, as there is very limited official guidance for clinicians, and often they err on the side of caution. The number of DIY users in the UK is unknown, but it is considered to be growing. There is no official data because often users don't tell their doctor that they're using it. The data may indicate that they are if the doctor is clued in, but how forthcoming either the doctor or the patient are in discussing the use of DIY APS may depend on personalities and a range of other factors. Some clinics may see a higher number of DIY users than others, and again, that can be, perhaps depending on where they are geographically, socioeconomic indicators of the area and other things. And the decentralized procurement model that I just talked through may mean that some trusts have varying levels of diabetes technology uptake anyway, in terms of what's already available, in terms of insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitors. So that can impact on a clinician's knowledge of the systems and how they work. And what we've seen is, as DIY has developed, that the users are becoming are the experts in the technology. Indeed, I'm sure other presenters at the workshop are going to speak about how industry and the community are working together to develop the technology going forward. And that shows the expertise that exists in the DIY community and how useful that is. But more work needs to be done so that clinicians and users can learn from each other on how the technology benefits the patients day to day. And that's one side of it, but the other side of it is work also needs to be done to transition the changing relationship between the patient and the clinician as a result of what diabetes. DIY APS is an empowering technology. It has empowered these patients to manage their diabetes in new ways and with new technological skills and advances. So that empowerment needs to be reflected now in the clinician and user relationship. Some clinicians are clued in. It's not that no one that people don't know anything. So on the slide, there are two events. So the top one is an event organised by the community called Rise of the Machines. It's the community and some clinicians will come and speak at that event, and they're engaged and they'll learn from the community as well as giving their insights into how the professional side see DIY APS use. And the second one at the bottom is organised by clinicians for other healthcare professionals. You'll see that one was cancelled due to COVID, but there have been previous ones. But that's in a particular area, and if you live somewhere more rural, or your clinicians don't engage as much in continuous professional development, there's no obligation to attend these. So work needs to be done to ensure that there is system level understanding of the technology and of the devices. And one thing, in the UK we had a medical devices safety review on particular devices, implantable devices, but it raised issues about the whole system and the culture of not listening to patient experiences that persists in the NHS. And I think the recommendations of that review still need to be put in to law and to practice, but there's definitely a culture there that needs challenged and changed. So that highlights that the community aspect of DIY is an advantage and will continue to be so. Users are experts in the technology itself and how it works, but also in providing support and understanding and emotional care and empathy to other users. Access to healthcare professionals is not as quick, and as they don't have diabetes themselves, they may not be as empathetic or as knowledgeable about the day-to-day concerns and thought processes that users have. So the support provided by the community is not just technical in terms of how to get the system up and running. In the UK, users have been running Living with Looping events, which are workshops to discuss a range of lifestyle factors that might impact both positively and negatively on a person's experience of using DIY APS. So there appears to be a culture developing of information and experience sharing, particularly to assist persons to be informed about the choices they make with regards to looping. And we've seen that DIY technologies more generally are expanding, and as individuals and groups are beginning to challenge the politics of health. This year, with the response to COVID-19, has really shone a light on these practices, particularly with regards the manufacturing of ventilators, but other projects as well, like open insulin highlight how patient groups can mobilise to counter the dominant politics of healthcare. And that might continue, like I've just mentioned about the culture within healthcare. People might, it could be that people choose not to fall into that and choose other options that suit them more. So I don't think it's enough to say that the legal problems associated with DIY APS are solved by industrial progressions that mean licensed products will be available on the market. It may change the composition of the DIY community, as some users may switch to these devices, but some may remain loyal to DIY, and some new users of DIY may come forward. The legal, ethical and policy problems raised by DIY APS are not substantively dealt with by the emergence of licensed devices, but are merely painted over. And what we need to do is engage with specific legal and policy work in order to fill the gaps in the regulatory framework and in the guidance on how healthcare professionals should respond to DIY APS, and then more broadly, other DIY health technologies. As I've mentioned as well, the systemic failures of healthcare systems to deal with medical devices effectively, to be able to prevent harm, to track devices, to listen to patients' experiences with devices, and when they go wrong and when they raise challenges, show that the system is not perfect, and it won't be made perfect by the 2017 regulations either. So there is work to be done to try and figure out what regulation needs to be doing in this area as it becomes more and more technologically advanced. So I've said here that it's like papering it over. It's like, okay, well, we've licensed them now, that's okay, and it's not really that simple. So what we do and what we hope to do in the new project that we've applied for funding for is that we propose that considering DIY APS as citizen science is a useful way of doing this. Citizen science is a broad descriptor that has come to label non-professional involvement at any stage of the research process, from identifying problems and questions to answer and address, right through project design to data collection, analysis, and the dissemination of findings. In categorizing these actions a bit further, it can be for the people, which is usually the donation of specimens or personal data, like sequencing your DNA and uploading that to a repository. With the people, which involves the systematic collection of data by citizen scientists, which is then analysed by researchers. That's often done in studies of nature and local ecology, where people will collect samples and then give that on to the professional scientists. And then lastly, and the one we're interested in, is by the people, which is conducted in partnership, where the citizen scientists contribute to the study's objectives, to data collection and interpretation, and then the development of relevant actions from the research at the end. So traditional research communities are gaining interest in this, but it is different from patient public engagement methods that were fashionable in the early 2000s, whereby healthcare thought, oh, we should really ask the patients, but it was still very much a top-down relationship. With citizen science, the power dynamics are more equalised, and in fact could be skewed more towards citizens. And it should be a mutual learning process of true collaboration. So we think DIY APS is a good example, in fact, an example par excellence, as it demonstrates 4 pillars of engaged citizen science. It has a true citizen origin. It operates complete openness and transparency. Control is retained by the citizens, and at the end of it, there is an open access product available. But the question we then hope to address with our work is, can we DIY the law in order to avoid that papering over of the cracks and to find solutions for legal, ethical and policy questions that DIY APS raises? The task of finding solutions to complex, multifaceted problems benefits from the active contribution of all those knowledgeable and or affected by the issues at hand, central to which is people with diabetes as experts in their condition and in using DIY APS. Our project hopefully will engage DIY APS users, non-users, clinicians and policy stakeholders in a series of activities to DIY the law in order to gain knowledge and understanding of the different perspectives on legal and regulatory challenges posed by technology, and work together to find consensus and establish common guidance and best practice that could be disseminated to improve diabetes care, and also be used as a basis to advocate for better regulation and legal protections and safeguards in this area. The project will bring those people together to undergo, to collaborate. The proposal was developed in collaboration, but there will be collaboration throughout its lifetime and beyond it, hopefully. But will also involve processes of deliberation, so that like there's in-depth thinking about the law in particular areas, what it currently looks like, other legal principles. There's an element of educating on the law as well, so that the proposals can be realistic and considered. And then finally, consensus building between the different actors in the ecosystem that I mentioned at the start, in order to bring ideas together and finalise guidance and positions that then can be advocated for going forward. So I'm going to leave it there, and thanks for your attention if you've made it this far. I look forward to discussing everything I've said and everything the other presenters say on the 16th. Thank you very much, and I'll see you then.